acknowledge the traditional custodians of the grounds we stand on and thank them for allowing me to tell story on these glorious lands we share. Hello there, and welcome to South by Southwest Sydney, here at the iHeart Podcast Stage International Convention Centre, Sydney. If you're new to 3 Food Memories, I ask guests to share their 3 food memories and a social cause close to their heart, with the promise they'll reveal far more about themselves than what they've tasted. While at high school, our guest on this episode of 3 Food Memories was asked by a teacher to write down 3 professions she'd like to pursue as an adult. She wrote just one. And unlike those of us who could barely decide what we wanted to be, she set her sights on that infinite and unknown area beyond the stars and achieved what most of us dare to dream. She headed for the stars and graduated from the European Space Agency, the first international astronaut candidate to do so. Please welcome to the stage Australia and TFM's first ever astronaut, Katherine Bennell-Pegg.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Katherine, when I look up at the night sky, I see black and twinkles. What do you see?
Oh, wow. I see the view of the universe that humans have seen since as far back as memory goes. For tens of thousands of years, people, including, First Nations Australians, have been looking up to the sky to guide our lives, to help us understand how to hunt food or to help us reflect on what it means to be human. And here in Australia, when we look up at the sky, we can see the centre of the Milky Way, our galaxy, and we can also see planets. So if you look up there, you can often see planets like Venus or Mars. Today, we can also look from space to Earth. So up there is the International Space Station, which often passes overhead for a few minutes. If you look up there, there's probably an astronaut looking back at you. So for me, the night sky is what motivated me. Yeah, we should be waving back. One day maybe I'll wave down and say hi. The night sky is what motivated me.
What did you see out there as a child when you were a young kid and you looked up? What did you think was out there?
Well, my mum studied physics at uni. Both my parents were accountants, but that was her university degree. She was the first person in her whole side of the family to ever go to university. And she told me that some of those things that look like stars were actually planets that no one had ever seen up close, no one had ever walked on. And as a young kid, you have such a sense of curiosity. I wanted to go explore them. It sounded great.
Lots of kids dream of being an astronaut, the lure and exciting discoveries, exploration, essentially fun. Few follow through though. At what point did you realise that space exploration was just, there? You could touch it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's such a powerful dream. Actually, 7 out of 10 Aussie kids under 12 would go to space if they could. I was recently surveyed, which is incredible. Space is such a gateway for people to have big dreams about their lives. And for me, when did it seem real? I think as I grew up and got to high school and said I wanted to be an astronaut, at that time, when I wrote that down, I was very lucky that my school and my parents didn't patronise me or tell me it was silly. Instead, they said, go and figure out what that would take, probably hoping that would teach me sense. But actually, what I learned is that to be an astronaut, you can be an engineer or a scientist or a pilot or a medical doctor. You should like doing things like flying and expeditions and all those kind of amazing things. And I was like, yes, please. But we didn't even have a space agency back then in Australia or any pathway to being an astronaut. So I figured out pretty quickly that it was going to be a hard road.
In April this year, you graduated from the European Space Agency astronaut training program, astronaut big school.
It is like school, yeah. Coolest school ever.
What now?
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's pinch me stuff, isn't it, to have just graduated and be an astronaut. And to graduate from astronaut training means that you're ready for professional assignment to a mission to the space station for, say, 6 months, for example, or even beyond to the moon when people start going back. But, there's no flight for me guaranteed. it's a decision for Australia to take when the time's right to take it, should we want to have, an astronaut go up. And we'll see. So right now I've come back to Australia just a couple of months ago. I've been getting out across the country, speaking to people, particularly school kids and university students about having big aspirations for themselves, whether that's in space or otherwise, and also working with our researchers to help them be involved in human spaceflight too.
Before we blast off into your food memories, most of us have a bucket list of places we want to travel to. Do you have a bucket list of missions you'd like to get onto?
Like any mission would be an incredible honour if it's going up there to do, special science you can't do on Earth, which is why you go up. Actually, in a space station mission to the International Space Station, which is a beautiful place, the accepted risk profile in the design is 1 in 200 fatality. So you don't go up there just to have a good time or take a selfie. You're going up there to do important research in service to your country and service to the world. For me, I would love to go up and work on experiments that would help with research into diseases like cancer. And the space station, they found that cancer cells actually metabolize a little bit differently, so we can understand a little bit more about some treatment pathways perhaps. I would, love to do a spacewalk. Every astronaut wants to do a spacewalk. When you open that hatch and step out into space, I mean, you're in a spacesuit, but you're really immersed in it. And what I'm told is you actually feel a bit of vertigo. Like, even if you're not normally scared of heights, when you're up there, you look down and it's just something in you feels it. And you're told actually not to look down right away, to give yourself a few minutes to just settle.
Is there a temptation to look down?
Oh, I mean,
in the training?
Eventually you turn around and the view is spectacular, because up there you get, a sunrise or sunset every 45 minutes on average. You can see the northern or southern lights, the lights of cities, the thin blue line of the atmosphere.
Quite a privilege then, isn't
Absolutely a privilege, yeah. And you're going out there to do the hardest thing you can do as an astronaut, which is a spacewalk, often, more than 6 hours. It's really hard physically. And yeah, the moon is the dream for every one of my astronauts. In the generation of astronauts I'm in, that's where people are going in the next decade. Mars is the purview, I think, of the next generation to follow. A kid today somewhere.
You know what I just thought about? My family members, young family members, when I told them I was coming to meet with you today, they said, the moonwalk wasn't real. What are your thoughts around those theories?
I think the fact that it's got conspiracy theories around it is just evidence of what a phenomenal achievement it was, in a world that didn't have desktop computers or even calculators, the internet or Instagram. We didn't have 3D printers or even, the ability to manufacture the way that we can now in space. It's amazing. On the Apollo vehicle, people have said, there was less computing power than in your iPhone.
Wow.
So it's a testament to that era. But what I say to them is, there were just fundamentally too many people involved. There were thousands of people involved, including people here in Australia that tracked the Apollo missions from the ground. And there's no way that many people could be in on something like that, and you couldn't replicate the kind of tracking you'd have to do. I mean, you can attack the different conspiracies arguments one by one. Some people think we can't get past the radiation belts. Actually, you can. It's just like firewalking, right? You can walk on hot coals and move through a floor of coals because you can do it quickly. It's the same, and there's many others.
Well, we're all here to listen to your food memories. Let's start with your first one. Now, your first one is a little famous Aussie chocolate.
Fantales, which I just learned were discontinued. My goodness.
I wanted to bring you all Fantales today to leave on your seat, and then I went to the supermarket and they're not there. So I went to another supermarket, they're not there. And I was like, you're joking. I live in Supermarket Central. So then I was like, where can I buy Fantales? And I found out that they've discontinued.
I know, it's a bit devastating. So there are a lot of people's memories. They'll live on in their own way. But for me, when you asked me to come up with memories, I was struck by how many of them that came to mind were linked to my childhood, and this is one of those. And for me, in science class in early high school, my science teacher was a great big personality, and she said if we can call her out on a mistake she makes or in her notes, her worksheets that she created for us, she would throw you a fantail like across the room and you'd catch it and be very happy. And I half wonder if that's one of the reasons I like science so much at that age, because I love chocolate, or is it the reason I love chocolate because
Chicken
I
or
love
the egg?
science so much?
Yeah.
What came
What
first?
came first? That's
Yeah.
So your love of chocolate or your sweets or your love of science? Like, what do you think?
I think I liked both before, so it was a beautiful, amalgamation of two great things.
Your food memories, and we'll get into them soon as we move along, suggest to me you have a sweet tooth.
I do have a sweet tooth. Yeah, I'm terrible. Don't leave chocolate near me. I just, my mother was a chocoholic as well. We used to have a chocolate drawer at home, but it was good because it taught me a bit of self-discipline. You can't eat them all day, but I enjoy them.
Let's go back to this Fantale. If they're almost extinct. I think you can still get them, but it's going to be really hard. Let's talk about this virtually extinct little sweetie. So to describe them, they're soft, chewy. They're unique to Australia, so they're soft, chewy little caramel squares covered in chocolate. And do you remember? And tell us about what they were wrapped in.
They had, the wrapper was yellow with, I think, blue and maybe purple or red next to the blue. And it was all like a waxy paper, and written on them was stories about, I think, musicians and actors and things like that, because it was fan tale stories for the fans. But yeah, I usually didn't read it. I was too busy eating it and trying to find the next mistake in the notes.
Do you have any other favourite lollies or candies, as our American cousins call them?
Oh, so many. I'm not that fussy, to be honest. I've had the pleasure to live across more than 6 different countries, some of those more than once through my work as a space engineer, and every country has its own lens on it. Like when I was in astronaut training, I shared an office with the Belgian astronaut Raphael, and my first day he brought me Belgian chocolates, and I was like, oh, what do I bring you? I've got some Aussie chocolates, which are great, but they're not,
Tim Tams would have been.
Yeah, I gave him some of those. It was great. But yeah, it was a really nice way to bond, was to share the chocolates and sweets from our nation.
You said earlier that your teachers and your parents were very supportive of you taking the track of astronautism. What about your peers? What was their reaction when you were telling them, I'm going to be an astronaut? I mean, it's okay. It's kind of.
I didn't run around shouting it for the whole world to see, but my friends definitely knew that I thought that was really amazing and interesting. And at school, I was doing aerobatic flying and things like that, which was amazing.
So everything that you did was a step towards.
Yeah, but I was very lucky in that I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I don't think I would have forced myself to do it just to fit that mold. And actually, I was quite a sporty kid. Probably I needed to be to burn off all those sweets and chocolates. But basically, the sports were just as important as the other things. But yeah, my friends used to call me co-pilot Katherine. It was quite funny. But no, it was fine. It was a positive experience. I was very fortunate with that.
Do you have any other astronauty friends that you hang out with, chew the work vat? Do you?
Yeah, well, especially living internationally as part of the expats who will often be living in cities that were hubs for space. So I lived in Bremen in northwest Germany, for example, and in Stevenage near London.
What are the work conversations?
Oh, it's so geeky. We just geek out. And actually when I moved back to Australia and I was hanging out with all my school friends, who I still keep in good contact with, I was like, oh gosh, no one here cares about space. What do I talk about? No one cares about what just launched last week. But yeah, you do talk a lot about space, but more the practical day-to-days as well as the cool missions that are upcoming as well.
Okay, so this is me being a total no idea person. So I can connect to the concept of space, systems and engineering as 3 separate things. Space, systems, engineering. I get 3 of them as standalone little people. But help me bring them together. What is space systems engineering?
Yeah, well, great question, because when I applied to study engineering, I didn't really know what engineering was. I was graduating high school wanting to be an astronaut, and I knew some astronauts were engineers, and I wanted to be a scientist, but I could do a double degree with space engineering, and I picked it because it had space in the title. And I'm so glad I did. I did not fit the stereotype of an engineer. I'd never written a line of code. I'd never used a drill. But my passion for the field of space drew me through to a point where I grew to love it, because engineering is about inventing things. It's about solving problems, and often doing that in teams that are united with a common passion to solve that problem or make that discovery. And as an engineer, I first worked with scientists that had big questions like, how do I measure all the surface currents of the ocean? Or how do I find evidence of water on Mars? And I would work with them to help create the missions that would do that. So an engineer basically designs.
You've got tingles. I just like,
so
that's
so as a space engineer, it's like any other engineer but applied to space. So you can design satellites, you can design rockets, you can design space stations. I haven't done rockets, but I've done the satellites and bits of space stations and space station concepts. And systems engineering is kind of like the umbrella that pulls all the different subsystems together. So in a space mission, you'll have, the structures and the mechanical parts and the moving bits like mechanisms. You'll have the electronics, you'll have all the computers, you'll have the bits that keep it stable and controlled and guided. They're all subsystems, and the system engineer knits it all together and comes up with the concepts and makes sure it's tested. So if you string those things together, space systems engineering, I basically spent most of my career coming up with new concepts for missions, working in teams to brainstorm them, down select the ones that are the best, and then make them happen. So it's been really fabulous. And now I get to learn how to operate the kind of things I used to help do space systems engineering on.
I read somewhere as part of your training you had to learn Russian.
I did, yes.
Why Russian?
So the International Space Station, the ISS, is the home of astronauts, of most astronauts in space today.
So if we were to look up in the sky, where is this station?
Oh, it's going around the world.
So
it goes around the world roughly every 90 minutes. And there's a little app you can get on your phone which gives you an alert when it's going to go overhead.
Russian,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. No, and one of the reasons for its place in the sky is because parts of it are launched from Japan and parts of it were launched from Russia and parts of it are launched from the US. But basically, a huge chunk of the station is Russian and a huge chunk of the station is the US segment, which also hosts the Canadian, the Japanese and the European parts. And on the US segment, you speak English. And on the Russian segment, everything's in Russian. So everyone that goes up there has to know both.
How proficient in Russian do you have to be?
It depends on your role up there, but we had 8 weeks of lessons spread over 4 months, super intense, and we had to get to advanced, basically. And that was tough. Yeah, okay. I'm not good at languages, so I had to know right from the beginning. I knew that right from the beginning, so I really put in the effort from day one. The fear was in my heart that this was going to be the thing that meant that I'd be coming back to Australia not a qualified astronaut. But I managed to get through it, and it just shows, I think, that effort is more important than talent, even on astronaut training, and that's a message I try and give to kids as well when I speak to them now I'm back.
I just this week, NASA launched the Europa Clipper. I'm going to read this because there's a lot of fact in here, which is set to travel 1.8 billion miles to reach Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It's not expected to arrive until 2030. How will this kind of, and missions like this, how will this space exploration benefit everyday humanity here on Earth?
Wow, yeah, it's a great question. And I think with space, it seems really abstract for the most part. This particular mission is going to Europa, which is an icy moon around Jupiter. And I think it's a really incredible mission because we think that those icy moons, that particular one, is thought to have a liquid water ocean under kilometres of ice on the surface.
And how do we know that?
By looking at the gravity of how it moves and people that have done different kind of mathematical models looking at the tidal forces of Jupiter. So it's the tidal forces of Jupiter that keep it liquid under there, and it's really incredible. And we think there could be life there or in some of the other icy moons. Okay, probably small life, like microbial life.
Oh, okay, not like other people like us, just... Not like
not like us. That would be very surprising. But I think that search for life in our solar system is really compelling, not just because it would fundamentally change what we mean to be human if we find something, whether it came from the same source, the same genesis as us, which means where on earth did we come from, or if it's a different genesis, which would mean, wow, if we've had more than one genesis in our solar system, there must be life everywhere in the universe, right? But more practically, the study of life off Earth, it's called astrobiology, and that also looks at things like extremophiles on Earth, things that live on deep sea vents, for example, and helps us to understand better how life can be more resilient on Earth and more adaptive to disruptions like climate change.
Sparing a thought for Williams and Wilmore, they were supposed to be on an 8-week mission, and because of some little hiccup, looks like they'll be stuck there for another 24 weeks. Apart from William's joint pain relief, which apparently there is zero gravity up there, well, there is zero gravity, and she doesn't feel the pain in her joints, what do you think is going on for them, like as a fellow astronaut? What's going on for them? And what sort of training do you get for this sort of, in preparation for these sort of hiccups?
Yes. So what's interesting is that, most astronauts go to this International Space Station, which, by the way, is almost the size of a soccer field. It's huge. The inside air volume is about the amount of a 5-bedroom house or the passenger part of an A380. It's pretty big. There's usually 9 astronauts up there at the moment, including, Butch and Sunny. And for them, they went up on a test flight, and it was a foreseen potential outcome that they would have to stay there longer if things didn't work out optimally. So they would have been prepared a bit for that scenario. There's plenty of supplies up on the International Space Station. They'll be safe. But, uncertainty is part of being an astronaut, and it's a tough part. And that's one of the reasons that we have particular psychological profiles in the selection that they look to select in or out, and that we're trained to deal with as well on Earth. So as an astronaut, you provide, as part of your service to your country, who provides it to the world, the ability for new vehicles to be tested and to be at that cutting edge of the cutting edge. It's part of the job. Yeah.
Service to humanity.
Yeah.
Let's move on to your second. I love this food memory, by the way. So it's vinegar hot chips on buttered bread. It's called a chip butty.
I think it's a bit of an English thing. My mother was English, and we used to often have those after the Saturday morning sports we did as kids, and often on the beach. And so the smell of vinegar or hot chips takes me right back there, and it's a good Aussie memory, particularly when I was living overseas. In the sun, eating hot chips and vinegar on buttered bread.
Do you have are you prescribed to a certain way that this chip butty is constructed? Is it the bread's got to be a certain way?
You don't want the bread to rip up.
Yes.
It's got to be soft, unhealthy, soft, white bread with lathers of butter. And I like the malt vinegar on it, and ideally a bit of chicken salt, which is an Australian twist, but it's great.
Can we squeeze in some ketchup or tomato sauce on that, or that's illegal?
Well, you might.
Are there other British foods that made their way into your family's kitchen growing up because of Mum?
Desserts like treacle tarts. We'd often get shipments of, minstrels or toffee crisps and other chocolates like that, which is kind of a flip for when I was overseas for much of my adult life, where I'd get shipments of Tim Tams and different Australian chocolates from my friends whenever we met.
What do you like in the kitchen?
I love cooking, but only when I have time. I don't like cooking under pressure. So it's more of a weekend thing for me, but it's also nice with the kids. They tend to eat more of the food if they help prepare it, I think.
What are some of the things that you like to prepare?
Oh gosh, I like, Asian food. I like a barbecue and a good salad, and I like desserts as well. So they're the main things.
What can you tell us about food in space?
Yeah, so food in space is interesting. It's evolved over time. So right at the beginning of when people went into space, they started off with pretty horrible stuff. It was food in aluminium toothpaste-looking tubes or dehydrated cubes covered in gelatin, because people did not know if we could swallow in space. They thought astronauts might choke. And as we've moved into a space station era in the last couple of decades, particularly when people live in space longer, food is not only for nutrition, that's very important up there, it's also for your team bonding and your psychology. So food in space today is better than most people expect. You can't have anything that creates crumbs, because it would fly around and get in people's eyes or nose or ears. Maybe not right away, maybe a week later. It's kind of gross. And so things like salt and pepper are liquid.
There's the chip buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that wouldn't pass. And then there's, you can't really have anything fresh for long. Sometimes there's 3 monthly food supplies. So sometimes people will bring up, fresh fruit or veg, but it's got to go straight away. Anything with living culture can't come up, Greek yogurt can't come up. And actually, one of the German astronauts, Matthias, told me that he made a contraband yogurt up there out of probiotic powder and milk powder, and put water in it and put it near a heat source, because he missed his Greek yogurt. And everyone freaked out on the ground, but he didn't introduce anything different, and it was apparently okay. So
what? It's taking food up there, it's about introducing known sources into that
Exactly.
atmosphere.
I mean, you don't want astronauts to get sick, and the food also might have to last a really long time. There's no refrigeration. So up there for breakfast, for example, you could have like prepackaged pancakes that exists. You can plug things. It looks like, baby food pouches with a little straw thing at the top. You can plug that into a machine and press hot or cold water to rehydrate food, kind of camping style, or for tea or coffee or juice. It's all through that machine. And, astronauts have a lot of fun trying to catch food in their mouth and things like that. But, there's quite a few foods, pardon me, there's quite a few foods that you can't have up there. Like you can't have fizzy drinks. It's happened before. There was the Coke and Pepsi wars. They vied to put the first one in space, but it didn't work out that well because on Earth, if you think of your stomach, liquid is at the bottom and air is at the top. But in space, there's no up or down. So all the air and liquid in your stomach is mixed up. And, a burp becomes a wet burp is how it's referred to. So you can't really. So, air bubbles don't do so well. But astronauts lose their appetite, their taste changes. You crave salty foods, spicy foods, because it's like you've got a bit of a head cold because there's a lot more pressure in your head from the liquids in your body, sort of like you hang upside down. So, it's interesting. And, astronauts always make sure they have a meal together at the end of the day. It's an important ritual.
Let's talk about the European Space Agency. Your time in Germany, the training. Tell us zero gravity, vomit comet, space food, pooing. Tell us, just give us a good chat about what was going on up there.
It's incredible. So when you're selected to be an astronaut, at the end of a long selection process, for me it was a 1.5-year selection process. And at the end of that, you don't get to call yourself an astronaut right away. You're an astronaut candidate. And it's only once you pass this what's called astronaut basic training, which takes over a year, that you can call yourself an astronaut. And this training takes all of us from totally different STEM backgrounds to the same point at which we can be assigned any kind of mission. So in my class, we had a doctor, we had a neuroscientist, we had an astrophysicist, we had a helicopter test pilot, and another engineer, but more of a focus on aeronautics for planes. And in the training, because we have to be able to do so many kinds of things in space, we studied science, because we're scientists in the sky. We're the hands, the eyes, the ears of scientists on the ground in our country. We do engineering. We learn how to build, maintain, operate the space station and the capsules, because there's no gym space station. If something goes wrong, you have to know how to do all the plumbing and all the electronics. We do everything you see in the movies. Like we were spun up in a centrifuge to feel what it's like to go to space and back again in terms of G forces. We felt up to 6G, like 5 of you are sitting on your chest, and how to breathe and deal with those scenarios, and also know that you can handle it. We learn how we react in how our body feels if you have a sudden pressure drop. We sat in chambers where we felt that, sort of like if you had a decompress on a plane, how our body reacts with low oxygen, how you stop being able to remember things like your home address, you get kind of dumb, and I got really giggly. I didn't feel out of breath, so things like that teach you what that might feel like. We did spacewalk training in deep pools underwater, because water is the closest way you can replicate microgravity for a long time on Earth. But so we'd descend in scuba gear with all the tools and things over full-scale mock-ups of parts of the space station and do missions. We would do vomit comets, which are flights where you basically fall through the sky and the plane falls around you and catches you at the end, and you do it in 22-second bursts. And you do that because water is heavy when you do scuba diving, so basically it changes the way you would move. It makes it a bit easier in some ways. Your motions are dampened. When you're in air and you start to move in microgravity, you're like a ping pong ball. You could spot the rookies. We were bouncing everywhere, and all the flown astronauts were chilling in the corner. And it was just incredible. And in that, we learned to do things like CPR by doing a handstand on the person, using tools.
Hang on, a handstand, like one?
Yeah, 2 hands on the person, and you do a handstand and do squats on the roof. Because otherwise you just push yourself off them and it's not very effective. Hopefully none of us have to use that, but it was quite an interesting concept. And using drills, you have to hold on so you don't spin instead of the drill doing all the spinning. We'd learn about space nutrition and space food as well, and how in Europe they've actually had their astronauts go to chefs in their home nation to develop some preference space food that they get to take up there to enjoy it, and also to share with the other crew members, because you're all a team of astronauts from a team of nations up there.
So it is about keeping that morale high, isn't it, as well,
Yeah.
and keeping everyone together in a community of sorts, because you're all all for one for all.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the Australian Space Agency is a relatively new specialist division, let me get this right, of the Australian Government Department of Industry, Science and Resources. It's kind of been around not long, has it?
Yeah, it's 6 years old.
6
So the
years
Australian
old.
Space Agency is relatively young. It's what brought me back to Australia and many others that were space professionals internationally. And it came out of the fact that in Australia, universities and startups started to put small, tiny satellites in space, satellites the size of a lunchbox or a shoebox, because they could. The cost of putting things in space lowered for launch costs coming down, and smaller electronics meant you could do things in a smaller way. And all of these organisations rallied to have a space agency. They wanted to have a central coordination point, and also international space agencies wanted to be able to work with Australia. So having that front door internationally was great.
So what's on the plate? Let's talk food, stuff. What's on the plate that we take to the international space sector table? How do we contribute to help international space exploration thrive?
Australia is massively punching above its weight on the world stage. It's amazing. In terms of food, though, I think we need to take something iconically Australian. But beyond that, we've actually got some fantastic research ongoing in a project that's called Plants for Space. It involves a lot of our universities and some other organisations. And they're looking at how do we use the environment of space to get better food sustainability, like vertical farming tech on Earth. And one of the crops they look at is called duckweed, which is these tiny little, these leaves that kind of go out over all of a lot of our inland lakes. It grows on the Torrens in Adelaide. It's not very special looking, but it just grows and grows and grows, and it absorbs almost any flavour you put on it. So that could be something that we take, and it's got a great protein profile as well. Because in space, nutrition is so important, because your body goes through all sorts of weird and wonderful things up there, and you need the right nutrition to stay healthy.
Your third food memory, back to sweets, marshmallows.
Yeah, so these days I live in Adelaide. I lived in Adelaide since the end of 2019 until I went and did astronaut training, and just have gone back there. And I really enjoy with my family, which includes 2 kids, a fire pit, particularly in a winter evening in the garden, and we'll always have marshmallows as part of that. So it's kind of a nice ritual that we do, especially if people have come around.
Is it good to be back home in Australia?
It's amazing. I think when you come home to a place, it takes you back to a place in your mind of almost when you left. So I left Australia after my undergraduate degrees, first because I didn't see a way to doing what I wanted to do in Australia, which was making big, beautiful space missions. So I went overseas. I came back for the Australian Space Agency, and all these memories that I'd forgotten existed about, my time at university and the putting yourself mentally back in that place kind of comes back to you. And and that's happened again after astronaut training. And it's great to be home. And I haven't been home in my house that much. I've been out across Australia into almost every state and territory now, speaking to people about space, which is great.
You said you have 2 daughters. How old are they?
They're 6 and 8.
So what do you think they think of their spacey mum doing spacey things?
I think they're young enough that it's kind of normal. Their dad, my husband's also a space engineer, so space has always been an important part of their life. And we're careful not to push too hard, because both me and my husband's parents are accountants, and we both recoiled from that career. Nothing wrong with it, but it just wasn't for us. At the Astronaut Centre, they were able to really enjoy it. Being part of the community of astronaut families is really important. It's sort of a safe space to talk about what you will go through, and many of their peers, their parents had already been to space, so they weren't special. So while they enjoyed getting out amongst, the astronauts' playground at the Astronaut Centre, as they called it, it was normal for them, which I think is wonderful.
Have you gone to one of those what does your parent do at school things and turned up in your astronaut jacket?
No, I haven't done that. But certainly coming home was great, because it was going back to a community that I was already part of, so it was no different.
Let's go back to toasting those marshmallows around the fire pit. What sort of stories do you share with your little girls around the fire pit?
Oh goodness, it's so many. It's hard to imagine. It's anyone with young kids knows there's a lot more day-to-day things than there are kind of big stories.
Do you look up to the sky and then sort of...
Yeah, I definitely point out what I see out there. I point out point out the International Space Station or some satellites you can see as well these days. And I try to give them a sense of awe and excitement. And I hope for them that they have a big dream to pursue, whether it's a space dream or not, and that they're able to do that with confidence and do it audaciously.
What do you think they want to be when they grow up?
My oldest wants to be a ninja assassin that also works for the UN. Don't know if those two things go hand in hand, but I don't really want to pop her balloon there. It's very cute. And the youngest one, I'm not sure. She told me once she wanted to be like an astronaut, doctor, helicopter pilot, astrophysicist, because she met all my classmates and that's what they did, and 3 of them were women. So for her, that was kind of a cool thing to do. But then I told her about the centrifuge, where you spin up and you feel really heavy, and how fun I thought that was. And she's like, not anymore, Mummy, I'm sorry. No more astronaut for me.
Let's move on to your social cause. Now, you've chosen diversity in STEM.
Yeah, so I think, in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, maths, there's a huge diversity problem in Australia, particularly gender diversity, but also other kinds. And it's a global issue. It's not uniquely Australian. And I think that this is a challenge because we need all kinds of thinkers, all kinds of doers to be able to solve the problems of tomorrow and to be able to meet challenges head on and make new discoveries that help all of us. And unless we have diverse thought and creativity, we cannot do that well. And we also don't see all the problems that we would see otherwise that need to be solved. So today, just to take astronauts as one niche example within that field, only 13% of people that have been to space today have been women. And that's not just an issue because diverse teams are more productive teams or because young girls are talented too, and talent comes from everywhere and we need their talent, but because in space you're a medical guinea pig for diseases on Earth, and often conditions and diseases on Earth can be quite gendered, like osteoporosis, for example. Astronauts' bones degrade super quickly in space if you don't do the right countermeasures like exercise. And you're a medical test subject up there. So if there's more women in space, more women on Earth benefit too. So I think diversity in STEM is a big issue.
Your work in space system engineering really points to the fact that you believe in a prosperous society, a society that grows and develops. What does a prosperous society look like from Katherine's point of view, from Katherine's eyes?
I think I've never been asked that before, but it's a great question. A prosperous society, I think, is one where everyone feels like they belong and that they're empowered to contribute to that society in a way that is really positive at the individual level, at the community level, and bigger. And I think that as people, we are all capable of so much more than we imagine ourselves to be.
What stops us, Katherine, do you think?
It's a great question. I think when we are young, many of us think everything has been discovered. Things are the way they are. And as our worldview expands, you realise that there's many other ways to live well. There's many other ways to raise kids well. There's many other ways to be healthy. And there's also a lot of ways that it can go wrong. And you can see that things can be improved. And you just have small things that you can see yourself improve, and that empowers you in many different ways.
We have an MFK Fisher Serve It Forth tradition here at 3 Food Memories, where our previous guest presents you, our current guest, with a dish. Ida Buttrose, just this week, has served you her famous $3,000 chicken dish with cheddar, Gruyere and Parmesan. And if you want to know why it's called a $3,000 dish, you have to listen to the episode. Our next guest is Heston Russell. What would you like to serve, Heston?
Oh, amazing. I think I would like to serve Heston some space food, duckweed from the Plants for a Space team, what they do, that kind of thing, just to see how, space food can translate to better outcomes on Earth for people like him who have had a highly performant life in much of what he's done.
Now, this is your opportunity to ask me any questions. So
many. I love the concept for this podcast, and I'd be really interested to understand what it is about food that led you to have this concept.
So I'm in the business of food. I've had a catering business for 30 years, and in that time I've collected conversations with people around food. And what I've discovered is it's the one thing, it's that one thread like a tapestry that connects us all. So it's not necessarily your food memories that interest me, it's actually the fact it's what brings us together, it's the experience around the food. And then when I pull all these stories together, so I've amassed virtually almost 60 conversations around this, I've discovered this fantastic community, and all I want to do is make it a big, a big snowball, and I want it to get bigger and bigger, and I want it to travel around the world and maybe make its way up to the International Space Station so we can create environments or create communities of belonging where everyone can be who they are and feel like they belong, and they don't have to have a reason or an excuse to be who they are. They just belong, they just exist, much like space. How did I go with that?
I love that. Amazing.
Listen, before we go, back to our mate stuck up there, Butch Williams said in his last press conference, he said, "We're up here with friends. There's 2 of them." How many people are up there?
Well, it varies. I think there's 11 right now on the space station. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few people up there. What else is up there? When I look up there, I'm kind of challenged to think about, my Christian upbringing. Let's talk about God for a second. Do you believe there is a God out there when you look up to the stars? Is there something bigger than the universe?
Well, maybe. I mean, I think it's really hard to know for me. I would say that the amazing thing about going to space is it makes us all reflect on that, right? A lot of astronauts are religious, a lot of astronauts are not, but all of them reflect on how humanity came to be on this planet, how the universe came to be, and also what's going to happen next, not just in the next 5 years or 10 years, but in the next millennia. And also, what will our era be remembered for, if it's remembered at all in this journey? So yeah, humans are not static like this forever. We're part of a big evolution. Our world is evolving. And going to space is wonderful in that it helps us to reflect on that, and also as our oneness, as belonging to all of humanity. And what do we want to do with that? Astronauts return to Earth having experienced the overview effect, where they've seen the world as one, without borders, without divisions, but also as fragile, because they can see the effects of pollution and things like that from space on Earth. And they come back to Earth wanting to help understand it, to help nurture it and protect it, and to spread that message that we're all so-called not passengers on spaceship Earth, but crew, and it's up to all of us to work on how to be better.
South by Southwest Sydney, a very big round of gravitous applause to the person who got to be what they wanted to be before they grew up. Katherine Bennell-Pegg, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of 3 Food Memories. In the next episode, you'll meet ex-Special Forces Commando Heston Russell.
I grew up never knowingly meeting a gay person until I passed the commandos and came to Sydney in 2010, and Oxford Street was my first exposure to gay culture.
Be sure to spread the plated love and check out our 50-plus back episodes. They're still as delicious as they were when they were freshly poached. And if you loved this episode, text a mate and tell them all about it. For all things TFM, head to the socials at 3 Food Memories and at Savas. For more info and to send us a message, head to the website 3foodmemories.com. 3 Food Memories is produced and edited by Lauren McWhirter with original score by Russell Torrance. Naste kalafili and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Papa's podcast. Don't forget to like